Okay, let's jump right in. We're going to be talking about a conflict that really completely changed the relationship between China and the West, the Opium Wars.
It all starts with a huge, and I mean huge, trade problem in the early 1800s.
Right, because Europe, and especially Britain, just couldn't get enough of Chinese goods. We're talking tea, silk, porcelain.
All of it. They loved it. But the thing is, China was almost totally self-sufficient.
Mm.
They didn't really want or need anything that Britain was making.
So you have this one-way street. Britain is buying tons of tea, but China will only take one thing in payment?
Silver. That was it. And you can imagine what that does to a country's economy.
Mhm.
All of Britain's silver was just flowing out of the country and into China. It was completely unsustainable.
They were hemorrhaging money, so they had to find something, anything, that the Chinese would buy back from them.
Exactly. And the product they found was opium.
Grown in British India and then smuggled into China on a massive scale.
It was a pretty cynical solution, but from their perspective, it worked. Opium is incredibly addictive. And once millions of Chinese people were hooked, Britain finally had its product.
And that flow of silver completely reverses.
It sure does. Now, silver is pouring out of China to pay for the opium, and the British economy starts to recover. But for China, it's a total disaster.
You've got two crises hitting at once. A public health crisis with millions of addicts, and an economic crisis as the country's wealth is just draining away.
And the Chinese emperor knew it. They tried, again and again to ban the drug, but the foreign merchants were just too powerful. The situation got more and more tense.
Until one official decided he'd had enough.
That would be Commissioner Lin Zexu. He was sent to Canton in 1839 with a clear mission.
Mhm.
Stop the opium trade. No more negotiating.
And he took a very direct approach.
He did. He blockaded the British traders in their warehouses and demanded they hand over all their opium, every last chest.
And what he did next is really the spark that lights the fire.
Absolutely. He took more than 20,000 chests of opium, that's about 1,400 tons of the drug, and had it all publicly destroyed.
Wow, that's a huge financial hit for the British merchants.
A massive one. They were furious. They went straight to their government in London and framed it as, an attack on free trade, a destruction of British property.
And the British government saw an opportunity.
A perfect excuse to use military force to solve their trade problem once and for all. They sent the Navy, and in 1839, the First Opium War begins.
So this brings us to the war itself. And it feels like the outcome was, well, almost decided before the first shot was fired.
It really was. This wasn't just two armies fighting. It was a pre-industrial empire facing the full power of the Industrial Revolution.
The technology gap was just that big.
It was a chasm. Think about the navies. Britain shows up with ships made of iron.
Not wood.
Iron. And they have powerful steam engines. This meant they could sail straight into the wind, go up rivers against the current. Weather didn't matter to them.
Which would be totally unthinkable for a traditional sailing fleet.
Completely. The Chinese Navy was still using wooden junks with sails and oars. They were just no match for these armored, steam-powered warships.
And on land.
Same story. The British had modern muskets that were reliable and accurate, but their real trump card was their artillery. They were using explosive shells.
So they don't just punch a hole in a wall,
They blow it up. They turn stone fortifications into rubble. Meanwhile, many Chinese soldiers were still using swords, spears, or very old, inaccurate cannons.
It's hard to imagine how you could even fight against that.
You can't. Bravery doesn't stop an exploding shell. Britain won basically every single battle, and they won them easily.
So what was their strategy? How did they use this advantage?
They were smart. They didn't need a huge land invasion. They used their navy to blockade China's coast and its major rivers like the Yangtze.
Cutting off all the internal trade.
Exactly. They were choking the economy. Then they started capturing key coastal cities to pressure the capital, Beijing. They took the island of Chuzan as a supply base.
And from there they could launch more attacks.
Right. They captured the city of Ningbo, but their ultimate goal was the Grand Canal.
Which was like the main artery of the empire, right? Moving food and supplies from the south to the north.
It was the lifeline. By controlling the entrance to the Grand Canal, the British basically had their hands around the throat of the Qing government. The emperor had no choice. He had to ask for peace.
And the way the war ended was just as one-sided as the fighting.
Oh, absolutely. In 1842, the British wanted to make a statement. They didn't negotiate on the coast. They sailed their entire fleet up the Yangtze River deep into China.
All the way to Nanking.
All the way to Nanking, which is a huge, important city. And they just parked their warships right outside the city walls.
Can you imagine seeing that? These huge iron steamships pointing their cannons right at your gates?
The message couldn't be clearer. Sign our treaty, or we will destroy this city. There was no negotiation.
And the treaty itself was actually signed on a British warship.
It was on August 29th, 1842. The Treaty of Nanking. It was a total surrender, which is why it's called the first of the unequal treaties.
Unequal because China had zero say in the terms.
None. They were just told what to sign. It was a moment of profound humiliation for an empire that had seen itself as the center of the world for millennia.
Okay, so let's break down what was actually in this treaty. What were the big terms?
Well, the first one is the one everyone's heard of, the Cession of Hong Kong.
Cession meaning they had to just give it away.
Yep. Hand over Hong Kong Island to Britain forever. At the time, it was just a rocky, barely populated island, but the British knew what they were doing.
The harbor.
The harbor. It was deep, it was protected, and it was the perfect location for a permanent naval base and trading hub right on China's doorstep. It remained a British colony for more than 155 years.
Wow. Okay, so that's term one. What's the second?
The opening of the treaty ports. Before the war, foreigners could really only trade in one city, Canton, and under very strict Chinese rules.
But the treaty changed that.
It blew it wide open. It forced China to open 5 major port cities. Shanghai and Canton were 2 of them, to foreign trade.
And in these ports, the British could just live there, set up shop.
Live there, buy property, trade with whoever they wanted, all without Chinese oversight. The Chinese government basically lost control over its own most important commercial centers.
That's huge. And there was a third major term, right? A financial one.
A crippling one. China was forced to pay an indemnity of 21 million silver dollars.
Which, for context, was an insane amount of money back then.
It was roughly equal to the entire annual income of the Qing government. It was designed to be a crushing blow.
And where did that money even go?
Well, this is the really audacious part. 6 million of it was to pay the British merchants for the opium that Lin Zexu had destroyed.
Yeah, hold on. China had to pay Britain for destroying illegal drugs that were poisoning its own people.
That's right. Then another 12 million was to cover Britain's entire cost for the war. So China had to pay for the military that had just defeated it. The rest went to cover debts.
So to get this money, the government has to raise taxes.
Exactly. And that tax burden falls on the poorest people, the farmers, which just leads to more suffering and instability across the country.
This all seems incredibly harsh. But there was one more thing, something added a little later, that might have been the most insulting of all.
Extraterritoriality. It's a complicated word, but a simple and infuriating concept.
Okay, break down for us. What does it mean?
It meant that a British citizen in one of these Chinese treaty ports was not subject to Chinese law.
So if they committed a crime,
Even a violent crime against a Chinese person, they wouldn't go to a Chinese court. They would be tried by British officials under British law.
they were literally above the law in a country that wasn't their own.
Precisely. And you could imagine the anger and resentment that caused. It was a constant daily reminder that foreigners could act with impunity on Chinese soil.
So when you add all this up, the drug addiction, the lost territory, the economic ruin, this legal immunity, the impact must have been catastrophic.
It was. People completely lost faith in the Qing dynasty. A government that can't protect you from foreigners, that can't provide justice. You stop believing in its right to rule.
And this leads to more conflict, right? Internal conflict.
Massive bloody rebellions. The Taiping Rebellion, which started just a few years later, was one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. Millions died. All of this instability could be traced back to the humiliation of the Opium War.
It's why this period is often called the century of humiliation in China.
It is. It's seen as the moment everything changed, when China was forcibly open to the world on terms it didn't choose, and its long history of dominance came to a sudden, painful end.
It's a powerful lesson in how technology and economic power can completely reshape the world. Understanding this really helps you see how global power dynamics work, even today.
And just think about this. The entire conflict was fought to force China to accept a drug. If Britain had found something else to sell, something China actually wanted, you have to wonder how different the history of the entire region might have been.
That's definitely something to think about. Good luck with your studies.